There may have been other peoples, he says, whom the Nephites never discovered living then on this great land. Or, as suggested, others may have come later. The very wide differentiation in the languages of native races of the Americas would seem to indicate this possibility. Elder Ivans felt that these thoughts did not disturb his faith in the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, concluding, whether all of these indigenous peoples were descended from Lehi matters little. Just because Lehi's people had come from Jerusalem by special direction, wrote Hugh Nibley in 1952, we are not to conclude that other men cannot have had the same experience. And by the same token, the fact that the Jaredites were led to the land of promise at the time of the dispersion gives us no right to conclude that no one else was ever so led, either earlier or later than they. It is nowhere said or implied that even the Jaredites were the first to come here, any more than it is said or implied that they were the first or only people to be led from the tower. Now, there is a great deal said in the Book of Mormon about the past and future of the Promised Land, but never is it described as an empty land. The descendants of Lehi were never the only people on the continent, and the Jaredites never claimed to be. In 1955, archaeologist M. Wells Jakeman noted, the Nephite record does not purport to give a history of all the New World for all the time before Columbus. Nor does the Book of Mormon claim to give the origin of all American Indian people found inhabiting the New World at the coming of the Europeans. In a statement approved for publication by the First Presidency of the Church, Elder Richard L. Evans described the Book of Mormon in these terms. The Book of Mormon is a part of a record, both sacred and secular, of prophets and peoples who, with supplementary groups, were among the ancestors of the American Indians. In 1961, Ariel Crowley thought it was beyond question that the Americas had received periodic migrations across the Bering Strait at various times. It would be incorrect, he argued, for one to say that all American Indians are descended from Israel. Neither is it proper to say that no American Indians are descended from Mongolian sources. It is equally improper to assert that Indians may not be descended from both sources, and very probably others as well. The mixture of populations in the Americas and throughout the world make definitive boundaries of descent very difficult to trace, and in most cases, truly impossible. Crowley insisted that past statements by church leaders were never intended to be critical analyses of racial ancestries, nor intended to exclude migrations from other nations and intermarriages with Nephite or Lamanite people. The Book of Mormon, he said, is no more the history of all the peoples and doings of past ages on the American continents than the Bible is the history of all peoples and nations of the East. Each covers its own time and provenance and makes no pretense beyond that. Native Americans are of mixed blood, very much like the mixtures produced in modern America, the melting pot of nations. The Book of Mormon attests to the presence of the blood of Israel. It is not in the least impugned by extraneous proof that other blood, by other migrations, found this land and mingled with the peoples there. The Book of Mormon, noted Hugh Nibley in 1967, offers no objection whatsoever to the free movement of whatever tribes and families choose to depart into regions beyond its ken. So it presents no obstacles to the arrival of whatever other bands may have occupied the hemisphere without its knowledge. For hundreds of years, the Nephites shared the continent with the Jaredites, of whose existence they were totally unaware. In fact, the idea of other migrations to the New World is taken so completely for granted that the story of the Mulekites is dismissed in a few verses. In 1975, the Ensign carried an article entitled, "Who and Where Are the Lamanites?" In addition to being descended from Lehi, Ishmael, Zoram, and Mulek, the author notes that latter-day Lamanites may also be descended from other groups of whom we have no record. Certainly they have mixed with many other lineages at the far reaches of their dispersal in the Americas and most of the islands of the Pacific since the time when Moroni bid them farewell in AD 421. Yet notwithstanding the mixed nature of these groups, they all have a legitimate claim to the blessings of the Abrahamic covenant. In 1976, in an article published for the Church's Liahona magazine, Ross Christensen notes the diversity in Native American languages made it clear that the original forefathers of the Indians came from diverse ethnic groups from many distant lands in the Old World. For this reason, it is impossible to declare with certainty that all American Indians are Lamanites. The Book of Mormon does not make this claim. although it is affirmed by some members of the church. One of the most prominent proponents of the idea that Native American populations were not confined to those of Israel is John L. Sorensen. Sorensen's views on how the Book of Mormon relates to ancient Mesoamerica had actually circulated in early form as early as 1955. In 1985, however, an expanded version of his work was published, and since then he's published many additional works related to the question. Sorensen argued that many elements found in the Book of Mormon text can be best accounted for under the assumption that Nephites and Lamanites included other people in addition to those descended from the original founding colony. For example, Jacob's condemnation of the Nephites having many wives and concubines during the lifetime of Jacob, son of Lehi, seems to call for a larger population of females. Male casualties in battle involving such tiny numbers could hardly have been very many. The only alternative explanation for a female surplus would have been the incorporation of other people. Similarly, the activities and words of Sharon also support this view. Jacob says, "There came a man among the people of Nephi whose name was Sharon." In his conversations with Jacob, Sharon indicates that he sought much opportunity to speak unto you, for I have heard and also know that thou goest about much, preaching what ye call the doctrine of Christ. Sorensen estimates the population of actual descendants of the Nephite colony could not have exceeded 50 by that time, hardly enough to populate a small village. Jacob, as head priest and religious teacher, would routinely have been around the Nephite temple in the cultural center, at least on all holy days. How then could Sharon never have seen him? And why would he have had to seek much opportunity to speak with him in such a tiny settlement? And where would Jacob have gone on preaching travels Sharon refers to, if only such a tiny group were involved? Moreover, from where was it that Sharon came among the people of Nephi? Sorensen also notes references to wars, flocks, corn, and other features that suggest the presence of other people. Even more recently, Grant Gardner, who's here today, has marshaled additional evidence suggesting that the Nephites were a minority people in the midst of many other Mesoamerican groups with whom they interacted. Several possible objections to the proposition that there were others in the land might be raised. Some have suggested that two Book of Mormon passages, Ether 2:5 and 2 Nephi 1:8, require an empty hemisphere previous to the arrival of the Jaredites, Lehites, or Melikites. The Ether text, however, actually refers to the wilderness through which the Jaredites were to travel in the Old World and says nothing about the populations of the New World at the time. The second reference from Lehi's prophecy reads as follows: "And behold, it is wisdom that this land should be kept as yet from the knowledge of other nations. For behold, many nations would overrun the land that there would be no place for an inheritance. Wherefore, I, Lehi, have obtained a promise that inasmuch as those whom the Lord God shall bring out of the land of Jerusalem shall keep his commandments, they shall prosper upon the face of this land. And they shall be kept from all other nations, that they may possess this land unto themselves. And if it so be that they shall keep his commandments, they shall be blessed upon the face of this land, and there shall be none to molest them or take away the land of their inheritance, and they shall dwell safely forever." One reading of this statement could be that Lehi's people inherited an empty promised land when their ship arrived, but the Book of Mormon allows for other interpretations. Is there a distinction, for example, between nations and other social groups? Lehi would have been familiar with nations such as Babylon or Egypt, who had well-organized armies, capable of sophisticated warfare and extending their power over large distances. Lehi's prophecy could allow for smaller societies which did not yet merit the description nations. Second, to possess this land unto themselves does not necessarily mean to be the only inhabitant, but can also mean that one has the ability to control and exercise authority over the land and its resources. Significantly, however, even Lehi's statement about other nations is conditional. Lehi indicates that the promised protection from threatening nations would be removed when his children dwindled in unbelief. John Sorensen has observed that the Lamanites, at least, dwindled in unbelief from the beginning. How then could Lehi's prophecy about other nations being brought have been kept long in abeyance after that? Furthermore, the early Nephites generally did the same thing within a few centuries. Their wickedness and apostasy culminated in the escape of Mosiah and his group from the land of Nephi to the land of Zarahemla. And if the Lord somehow did not at those times bring in other nations, then surely he would have done so after Book of Mormon, 1,100 years prior to Columbus. Even if there were no massive armed invasions of strange groups to be reported, we need not be surprised if relatively small groups of strange people who were neither so numerous nor so organized as to be rivals for control of the land could have been scattered or infiltrated among both Nephites and Lamanites without their constituting the other nations in the threatening sense of Lehi's prophecy. Thus, in terms of Lehi's prophecy, others could and probably even should have been close at hand and available for the Lord to use as instruments against straying covenant peoples at any time after the arrival of Nephi's book.